Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Today my guest is Rick Brennan, a career United States Army officer with extensive policy-making experience on issues related to the war in Iraq, conflict resolution, and strategic planning. He is currently at the RAND Corporation, a global policy think tank that does research for the United States and that has just finished a 3-year study on how the United States ended the war in Iraq. Mr. Brennan joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you for being with us. That's interesting study on how the United States ended the war in Iraq. Seems like the war in Iraq is started all over again.
Actually, one of the first sentences in our study is that while the United States ended the U.S. war in Iraq, that the war in Iraq continues, both with the insurgency that was within the country, as well as with the terrorist threat that was posed by, at that point in 2011, al-Qaeda in Iraq, which has since grown and transformed itself into what we now know as ISIL.
Well, Iraq does seem to be falling apart, at least at the moment. Do you really believe that these, what have been very limited airstrikes on the part of the United States can actually make a difference, can actually beat back the Islamic Republic?
I don't. I think that so far we have done pinprick strikes, and I think that while that's useful to stop the advance, it's not connected to any type of long-term strategy, either to how we help build an Iraqi military that can do this on their own, or how we defeat this cancer-like organization of ISIL that not only has designs on Syria and Iraq, but also Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, and the entire region. So this is something that I think the United States needs to take a much more aggressive action than what they're currently doing.
Yeah, it's too little too late in your view, what President Obama is doing?
I don't know that it's too late. It is too little. There's much more that needs to be done. We need to put more forces on the ground to advise and assist. And I know the President and the Secretary of Defense has said that there will be no boots on the ground, but that to some extent is ingenuous. We have boots on the ground. There's special forces, they're Marines, they're elite counterterrorism forces, but the mission is to advise, assist, and help the Iraqis, help the Kurds, help coordinate the international effort. But again, we need to do much more than we're doing right now.
Well, there are media reports that I've read today quoting analysts, some of them in the Middle East, saying that only a coalition force can actually push back the Islamics, the jihadists. And it seems that any such coalition force would involve tens of thousands of soldiers.
I think it depends on where you're looking at. The international community, the regional governments need to come together to fight this effort. And I think you're beginning to see pieces of that happening with the Turks becoming more engaged, the Saudis becoming more engaged. You have our allies in Europe that are becoming more engaged. But at the end of the day, I think you also need to have a strong U.S. presence that's helping to coordinate these efforts. You have to remember that in the 8 years and 8 months of the United States military spent in Iraq, they developed extremely close relationships with the Iraqi military and with the Kurdish military. Those need to be developed and cultured so we can help fill the gaps and help them build capabilities that we knew existed when we left prematurely in 2011.
Well, I was just wanted to ask you, I mean, the United States has spent billions of dollars training the Iraqi army, building the Iraqi army, and then 3 years after American troops leave, you have an Iraqi army that just completely falls apart in northern Iraq. I mean, how can you possibly explain that?
Well, a big part of the problem was we knew in 2011 that the Iraqi military had significant gaps in its capabilities. Those gaps existed in the areas of logistics, communications, the ability to plan and control, and almost most importantly, their ability to provide air support for troops engaged in combat. These issues were well known to every member of the administration, both the Department of Defense, State Department, and the White House. And that was the reason why the military recommended leaving at least 15 to 20,000 troops there to do the advise and assist mission not boots on the ground in terms of combat mission, but to advise and assist, to help train and the Iraqis to get to the point where they were doing. The Iraqi political system was very, very fragile. We knew that our presence helped stabilize Iraq, yet at the same time, the administration made a choice to leave. And that's why as we did our study, we looked at the whole issue of leaving and the impact that would have on the long-term security of Iraq.
Yeah, but the issue of the military leaving, if I understand correctly, it was because Washington and Baghdad were unable to come to terms on the conditions for for keeping some troops in Iraq. Is that correct? And if so, whose fault is that? Is it Washington's fault? Is it Prime Minister Maliki's fault? Is it both their fault? Why couldn't they come to an agreement on that?
Well, you're correct in that the United States and Iraq couldn't come to an agreement. The fault lies in many directions. Well, if you at one level, you could look at the Sunni politicians who are unwilling to stand up in Parliament and take the initiative to have a parliamentary vote for immunities, which the United States demanded. On the other hand, the administration was absolutely unwilling to negotiate with the prime minister. And while the military recommended a minimum of 15 to 20,000 troops to stay in Iraq, the president only offered 3,500. He offered it late in the game, and he demanded absolute immunity. And that type of immunity didn't exist for the last 2 years, or the 4 years the U.S. were in Iraq under the Strategic Framework Agreement signed in 2008. So the prime minister came on board and said, listen, I'm willing to sign immunities for U.S. troops with my name. But the administration came back and said, the only thing that we will accept is a parliamentary vote. And Prime Minister Maliki said, given what's going on in our government today, we just can't do that. Mm-hmm. And so the president made an offer that the Iraqis couldn't accept.
It sounds as though you think the president made a mistake.
I think history will prove that it was a mistake not to find some way of coming to a negotiated settlement with the Iraqis and an agreement that would have left U.S. forces there for this advise and assist mission. Had we kept those forces there, we wouldn't be facing the problems we're seeing today.
But Mr. Brennan, can you really see this President Obama, getting himself involved in another military action in Iraq? He keeps insisting that he's not going to do it. Can you really see this happening, or is Iraq simply just going to fall apart?
Well, I think this president is finding it impossible not to get himself involved with this third Iraq war, if you will. We're doing it. The United States is going in piecemeal. They're going in slowly. Just today, they announced additional numbers of advisors, and I think those number of advisors will have to continue to grow. But most importantly, we've got to have a strategy. Just putting forces there for this advise and assist doesn't make any sense. You need a strategy for defeating ISIL, and those strategies should have goals and objectives and resources necessary.
And briefly, what would such a strategy involve?
The strategy, I think, has several components. One component of the strategy must be sufficient forces to work alongside of the Iraqi security forces, the Kurdish forces, in order to start repelling and defeating ISIL in Iraq. A second part of it needs to be engagement with our regional partners to have them provide assistance in this fight also. And the third, I think, has to go after the money. One of the big successes that the United States and Iraqis had in the 2007 and 2008 period in defeating al-Qaeda in Iraq was going after their money, drying up their resources, and that needs to be done again. It needs to be a whole government approach to how we solve this. But again, that requires a strategy. And as of this point, what the administration has is a couple of tactical operations to stop ISIL and to assist in the humanitarian issue. Okay. But that's not a strategy for defeating ISIL.
Okay. Do you think that sending arming the Kurds directly, bypassing Baghdad, is a good strategy? Or does this remind you of arming the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that turned out to be the Taliban later on?
No, I don't see that correlation at all. Arming the Kurds was exactly the right thing to do. The United States should have been doing this for a long time. The United States has had a very good relationship with the Kurdish regional government in Iraq, not only the Peshmerga, but the regional security forces, going back to 1991 in Operation Provide Comfort. And so, with the exception of the Turks and the Israel and perhaps Jordan, the Turks have the Kurdish peoples have been one of the closest friends that the United States has had. So I don't see this as being an issue. The United States has been sending arms and ammunition through the central government of Iraq that were supposed to go to the Kurds all along. The problem was that Prime Minister Maliki wasn't sending it forward because he wanted to use that as leverage over them on some of the internal political debates they had.
Do you think that the new prime minister will be able to form a government of national unity that can actually operate?
This is going to be a significant challenge. I mean, when you look at Iraqi politics, everything is governed by fear and mistrust, and there's a long history now of promises being made and not fulfilled, and that if you look at the prime minister's designate Abadi, he was part of the same Islamic Dawa party that Maliki was part of. He supported some of the same policies. Maliki. Very close to Maliki. And so the issue is whether or not he can convince the Sunnis to come on board with him and trust him to provide for their long-term future. And finally, the other problem in bringing this inclusive government, and the reason this is going to be such a challenge is because the different factions in Iraq not only have different interests, they have competing interests. And so you can just take one issue such as the city of Kirkuk.
Yes, I understand that. I'm afraid, unfortunately, that I'm going to have to cut you off, Mr. Brennan. Thank you so much. We appreciate your comments. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24 for more news in English, French, and Arabic.